The hospice room smelled like artificial lavender and defeat. My body had given up 3 weeks earlier, but my heart kept beating out of spite. Through the morphine haze, I could hear them in the hallway, my husband Richard and his mother Patricia, discussing my funeral arrangements while I was still breathing. "The reception should be at the country club," Patricia said. "Nothing too expensive. She wouldn't have wanted us to make a fuss. I'd never been to their country club. They'd never invited me." "Mom, can we not do this right now?" Richard sounded tired, but not sad. Never sad. "Oh, honey, you've been so brave through all of this, but soon you'll be free to move on. That girl from your firm, what's her name, Jessica? She's been very supportive." I tried to laugh, but my lungs had forgotten how. "Jessica? Of course." The machine started beeping faster. A nurse rushed in, checked my vitals, and gave me that look. The one that said hours, not days. As my vision started to blur, my last thought wasn't of Richard, or my career, or even the life I'd never get to live. It was of Dr. Morrison's face 4 years ago when she'd called me into her office. "Sarah, your test results came back. You're a perfect candidate for the trial. The early results have been extraordinary. We're seeing complete remission in 73% of participants. This could save your life." I'd been so happy, so full of hope. Then Patricia found out her daughter Melissa had the same disease. Stage 4, like me. But Melissa didn't qualify for the trial. Her genetic markers were wrong. Unless family members can transfer their trial spots in special circumstances, Patricia had said, sitting in my living room like she owned it. "The doctor said so. It's just paperwork." "But I need this treatment," I'd whispered. Richard took his mother's side. He always took his mother's side. "Melissa is my sister, Sarah. She has 2 kids. You and I haven't even started trying. Yet. It's the right thing to do." The right thing. I withdrew from the trial. Melissa took my spot. The treatment worked. She went into complete remission within 8 months. The FDA approved it 2 years later, and it became the standard of care. Every patient with my disease profile now had access to the cure. Every patient except me. I'd missed the window. By the time the treatment was publicly available, my cancer had progressed too far. Terminal. 6 months, they said. I made it 8, just to be difficult. The machines were screaming now. The nurse was calling for the doctor. Richard came into the room, his face pale. "Sarah, But I was already gone. And then I was gasping, choking, my hands clutching at fabric. Soft fabric. Expensive fabric. I was sitting up in bed, my bed, the one Richard and I had bought from that boutique furniture store in the design district, the one I'd picked out before the diagnosis. The sheets were cream-colored Egyptian cotton, and they didn't smell like hospital or death. They smelled like the lavender detergent I used to use. Before, I grabbed my phone from the nightstand. The screen lit up. March 15th, 2021, 4 years ago, 3 days before Dr. Morrison's call. My hands were shaking as I pulled up the camera and looked at my reflection. No sunken cheeks, no gray pallor, no thinning hair from the failed chemotherapy. I looked like I did in my early 30s. Healthy, vibrant, alive. The door opened. Richard walked in, already dressed in his suit, frowning at his phone. "Morning," he said, not looking up. "Mom wants us to come to dinner Friday. Melissa's coming home from the doctor. She's been having some issues. Mom's worried." The words hit me like a physical blow. Melissa's diagnosis. It was happening now. This week, she'd find out she had the same cancer I'd had, and in 3 days, I'd get the call from Dr. Morrison. Then they'd make me give it up, unless I didn't let them. "Sarah, did you hear me?" I looked at my husband, really looked at him. At 35, Richard was handsome in that generic way wealthy men often are. Good jawline, good hair, good at pretending to care. We'd been married for 6 years. I'd spent all of them trying to earn his family's approval. I died still trying. "I heard you," I said quietly. "I'll be there." He nodded, already leaving. "I've got an early meeting. Don't wait up tonight. Depositions are running late." Jessica, he was probably seeing Jessica even now, even before I got sick. The disease had just given him an excuse to be more obvious about it. I waited until the front door closed, then I ran to the bathroom and vomited. Not from sickness, from rage, from grief, from the sheer overwhelming weight of knowledge. I knew how this story ended. I'd lived it, died from it. Not this time. Dr. Morrison called on March 18th, exactly as I remembered. "Sarah, I have some difficult news. Your biopsy came back, positive for cancer. But please don't panic. We caught it early, and you're an ideal candidate for a revolutionary new trial we're conducting." I let her explain the whole thing, even though I'd memorized every word the first time. The trial, the cutting-edge immunotherapy, the incredible success rates. "I want in," I said immediately. "Whatever I need to do." "The enrollment process takes about 2 weeks. We'll need additional tests, full medical history, genetic screening. But Sarah, I'm very optimistic. This trial is changing lives." I knew. I'd watched it save Melissa's life while mine slipped away. After the call, I sat in the silence of our penthouse apartment and made a plan, because I knew what was coming. In the original timeline, I'd told Richard about the diagnosis that same night. He'd told Patricia. Patricia had brought Melissa over for a family meeting the next day, and they'd bullied me into giving up my spot within a week. This time, I told no one. I went to every appointment alone. I filled out the paperwork using my maiden name for contact information. I listed my estranged mother as my emergency contact instead of Richard. When the trial coordinators asked about family support, I lied and said I had plenty. I was enrolled in the trial by April 3rd. Melissa got her diagnosis on April 5th. I was having lunch with Patricia when Richard called her. I watched her face go white, watched her hand shake as she brought the phone to her ear. "What? Are you—" "Melissa, slow down. What did the doctor say?" She excused herself from the table. I stayed seated, picking at my salad, and I felt nothing. No sympathy, no guilt, just a cold, clear certainty. Patricia came back 10 minutes later, her eyes red. "I have to go. Melissa, she's sick. Very sick. They found—" She couldn't say the word. "I have to go to her." "Of course," I said gently. "Give her my love." The irony wasn't lost on me. The family dinner that Friday was somber. Melissa sat at the table, looking shell-shocked, while her husband Tom held her hand. Their 2 kids were at a sleepover, spared from the adult anxiety filling the room. Patricia had cooked enough food for 12 people, the way she always did when stressed. Richard kept refilling everyone's wine glasses. I nursed my water and watched. "The oncologist said it's stage 4. Melissa said quietly. "It's aggressive. I need to start treatment immediately, but the standard protocols, the success rates aren't good. There has to be something else," Tom said desperately. "Clinical trials, experimental treatments, anything." Patricia's head snapped up. "Clinical trials? Yes. Richard, didn't you say something about trials a few weeks ago? Something you'd read about?" My husband frowned. "I don't think so. Why?" "I could have sworn—" She shook her head. "Never mind, but we should research that. There must be trials for this type of cancer." I took a sip of water and said nothing. Melissa started crying. "I can't die. I have kids. They need me. This can't be happening." Patricia stood and wrapped her daughter in a fierce hug. "You're not going to die. We'll find a way. We'll find the best doctors, the best treatment, whatever it takes. Whatever it costs," Tom added. Richard nodded. "We're family. We'll all chip in." I wondered if he'd have said the same thing for me. I already knew the answer. The evening ended with promises to research clinical trials, to call specialists, to fight this with everything they had. I hugged Melissa goodbye at the door, and she clung to me. "Thank you for being here, Sarah. I know we haven't always been close, but it means so much that you care." "Of course," I said softly. Family. In the car on the way home, Richard was quiet. Then, "She's really sick." "I know. She might die. People do." He looked at me sharply. "That's cold, Sarah. She's my sister." "I'm sorry. I'm processing." I turned to look out the window. "I'm sure they'll find something. The doctors will figure it out." He reached over and squeezed my hand. It was the most affection he'd shown me in months. "Thank you for being understanding. I know my family can be a lot sometimes." A lot. That was one way to put it. I started the trial treatment on April 12th. The infusions took 3 hours every 2 weeks. I scheduled them for Tuesdays, when Richard had standing meetings all day. I told him I'd joined a book club. He didn't care enough to ask which books. The side effects were manageable: fatigue, some nausea, a weird metallic taste in my mouth. Nothing compared to what I'd endured the first time, with the brutal chemotherapy that had failed to save me. This treatment was targeted, elegant. I could feel it working. By the end of May, my tumor markers had dropped by 40%. Meanwhile, Melissa was getting worse. She'd started standard chemotherapy, but it wasn't working. The cancer was too aggressive, too far advanced. Patricia called me weekly with updates, her voice getting more desperate each time. "They're running out of options, Sarah. The doctors keep saying we'll try this next, but I can tell they're not optimistic. She's fading right before our eyes." "I'm so sorry, Patricia. That must be devastating." "We've been researching clinical trials, but she doesn't qualify for any of them. Her genetic profile is wrong, or the cancer is too advanced, or they're not accepting new patients. It's like the universe is conspiring against her." "Not the universe, just karma." "Keep trying," I said. "You never know what might open up." In June, Melissa was hospitalized. The chemo had ravaged her immune system, and she'd developed pneumonia. I visited her once, bringing flowers and a card. She looked skeletal in the hospital bed, her skin gray, her eyes sunken. She looked like I had looked at the end. "Sarah," she whispered, "it's bad, isn't it?" I sat down next to her bed. "You're fighting. That's what matters. I'm so scared. The kids, they're so young. Tom can't raise them alone. He's useless with homework, and Emily still has nightmares," and she started crying. "I can't leave them." I held her hand. It felt like holding bones wrapped in paper. "Melissa, have the doctors mentioned any experimental treatments? Trials?" "We've tried everything. I don't qualify for anything. It's like my body is the wrong type for all the cutting-edge stuff. I'm stuck with treatments from the dark ages, and they're not working." "That's terrible," I said, and meant it in a distant way. It was terrible, just not terrible enough to make me regret what I'd done. By July, my cancer was in complete remission. Dr. Morrison was ecstatic. "Sarah, you're one of our star patients. The tumor is undetectable, your markers are normal. This is exactly what we hope to see." I'd known it would work. I'd lived through Melissa's success the first time, but hearing it still felt like vindication. "How much longer in the trial?" "Another 6 months of treatment to ensure it doesn't come back, then monitoring for 5 years. But Sarah, you're cured. This is a miracle." "Not a miracle, just science and second chances." That same week, Melissa was moved to hospice care. Patricia called me sobbing. "They're saying weeks, maybe days. Sarah, can you come? She's asking for family." I went. Of course I went. The hospice room was smaller than mine had been, but it had the same smell: artificial lavender and defeat. Melissa was barely conscious, her breathing labored. Tom sat beside her, holding her hand, his face haggard. Their kids had been there earlier, Patricia said. They'd said goodbye. "She keeps asking about trials," Patricia said quietly. "Even now, she's asking if we found a trial. I don't know how to tell her we've exhausted every option." Richard was there too, standing in the corner with his arms crossed. He looked uncomfortable, like he wanted to be anywhere else. I stood at the foot of Melissa's bed and watched her struggle for breath. She'd taken my spot. She'd lived 4 extra years because of my sacrifice, and she'd never once thanked me because she'd never known. None of them had known what they'd asked of me, what they'd demanded. "I should tell you something," I said quietly. Everyone looked at me. "Tell us what?" Patricia asked. I took a breath. "I was in a trial, a cancer trial, earlier this year." Richard straightened. "What? You have cancer?" "Had," I corrected. "I was diagnosed in March. I enrolled in an experimental immunotherapy trial. As of last week, I'm in complete remission." The silence was deafening. "You have cancer?" Richard repeated, like he couldn't process the words. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it wasn't relevant to our marriage," I said coldly. "We barely speak. You're sleeping with Jessica from your firm. Why would I burden you with my medical issues?" His face went red. That's not. "Don't." I held up a hand. "I don't care anymore." Patricia was staring at me. You were in a trial for cancer. The same cancer Melissa has? The same genetic profile, yes. I qualified immediately. The treatment worked beautifully. And you didn't tell us? Her voice was rising. You didn't think that maybe, just maybe, we could have… Could have what? I turned to face her. Convinced me to give up my spot? Told me it was the right thing to do? Reminded me that Melissa has children and I don't? Tom stood up. Are you saying there was a spot in a trial? A trial that could have saved her? Could have? Did, actually. The trial has been incredibly successful. They're submitting for FDA approval next month. In a few years, this will be the standard treatment for this type of cancer. Melissa made a sound, a weak, gasping cry. Her eyes were open, lucid for a moment, and she was staring at me with something between betrayal and horror. You knew, she whispered. You knew there was a treatment. I knew I had cancer, I said. I knew I qualified for a trial. I knew I wanted to live. She's my sister, Richard shouted. We could have. No, I said firmly. We couldn't have. Only one of us could be in the trial at a time, one spot, one chance, and I chose myself. Patricia's face had gone from grief-stricken to furious. How dare you? How dare you stand here and tell us you let her die when you could have saved her? I didn't let her die. Her cancer killed her, just like mine would have killed me if I'd given up my spot. You selfish bitch, Richard hissed. She has children, a family. What do you have? A failing marriage and a job you hate. You're nobody, Sarah. You've always been nobody. The words should have hurt. The first time I'd heard similar sentiments, they'd destroyed me. I'd internalized them, believed them, let them justify my sacrifice. Now they just sounded hollow. You're right, I said calmly. I am nobody. That's why it was so easy for you to ask me to die for her, because my life didn't matter as much. That's not what isn't it? I looked at each of them in turn. Be honest. If the situation were reversed, would any of you have asked Melissa to give up a life-saving treatment for me? Silence. That's what I thought. Melissa was crying, weak tears sliding down her face. Sarah, please, is it too late? Can I still get in the trial? Dr. Morrison had prepared me for this question. I'd asked her, hypothetically, if there were any spaces left. The trial is full, I said, and even if it weren't, you're too sick now. Your cancer is too advanced. The treatment works best in earlier stages. So I'm just supposed to die? Melissa's voice cracked. Because you decided your life was worth more than mine? No, I said softly. You're dying because you have cancer, because medicine isn't fair, because sometimes there aren't enough miracles to go around. I paused. The same reason I would have died if I'd given you my spot. How can you be so calm about this? Tom demanded. You're talking about my wife's life. And you all talked about my death like it was a foregone conclusion, like it was noble, the right thing to do. I met his eyes. Tell me, Tom, if it were you in my position, would you have given up your spot? He opened his mouth, closed it. That's what I thought. I turned to leave, but Patricia grabbed my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. We would have helped you, she said desperately. If you told us, we would have found another way, another trial, another treatment. We would have helped both of you. I almost laughed. No, you wouldn't have. I know you wouldn't have, Patricia, because you didn't. I pulled my arm free. In another life, I told you about my diagnosis. I told you about the trial, and you convinced me to give my spot to Melissa. You told me it was temporary, that there would be other options for me, that family takes care of family. I would never. You would. You did. I looked at Richard. And you supported her. You told me Melissa had children, that her life had more value. You made me feel guilty for wanting to live. That's insane, Richard said, but his voice was uncertain. You're making this up. Am I? Search your soul, Richard. If I came to you tomorrow and said I had cancer, and there was one spot in a trial and Melissa wanted it, what would you tell me to do? He couldn't answer, but I could see it in his eyes. The calculation, the inevitable conclusion. I would lose. I would always lose with these people. "Goodbye, Melissa," I said quietly. "I'm sorry you're sick. I'm sorry there wasn't enough magic to save us both, but I'm not sorry I chose to live." I left before anyone could respond. Behind me, I heard Patricia screaming, Richard swearing, Tom sobbing. The hospice staff would probably have to remove them from the room. Drove home alone, and I didn't cry. Melissa died 3 days later. I didn't go to the funeral. Richard sent me divorce papers from his mother's house, where he'd been staying since our confrontation. I signed them without reading the details. He could have the penthouse, the furniture, the life we'd built. I didn't want any of it. I only wanted to live. The divorce was finalized in October. Richard married Jessica in December. A tasteful ceremony in the Bahamas. I heard about it through mutual friends, who took his side, which was all of them. The narrative had been set. I was the monster who'd let my sister-in-law die. I was selfish, cruel, inhuman. I didn't try to defend myself. The people who believed that narrative wouldn't have believed the truth anyway. I moved to a smaller apartment across town. I quit my job at the marketing firm where I'd been undervalued for years and started freelancing. I focused on my health, my recovery, my freedom. And I waited. The trial, results were published in February 2022. The treatment showed a 91% complete remission rate in patients with my cancer profile. It was hailed as a breakthrough, a revolution in oncology. The FDA fast-tracked approval. By June 2022, the treatment was available to any patient who qualified, including, I noted with bitter irony, patients whose cancer had already progressed to stage 4. If they'd caught it early enough in that stage, if Melissa had been diagnosed just 6 months later, she would have had access to the cure. But she died in July 21, when the trial was still ongoing, still restricted, still limited to people like me who'd fought to get in early. I thought about that sometimes, about how timing is everything, about how in my first life, I'd been early enough to qualify, but I'd given up my spot, and by the time the treatment was public, I'd been too late. And how in this life, Melissa had been too early, diagnosed before the treatment was widely available, but too late to take my spot after I'd already enrolled. Karma had a sense of timing, apparently. I saw Patricia once more, a year after Melissa's death. I was at a coffee shop near my new apartment when she walked in. She'd aged a decade in 12 months. Her hair had gone completely gray, and she moved like a woman twice her age. She saw me before I could leave. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. She walked over to my table. "Sarah." "Patricia." "You look well." It sounded like an accusation. "I am well, the treatment worked, I'm cancer-free." "Of course you are." She sat down without being invited. "Do you know what today is?" I did. It was Melissa's birthday. She would have been 41. "I know," I said quietly. "Her children ask about her every day. Emily won't sleep without the lights on. Max failed 2 classes this semester. Tom is drinking himself to death." Patricia's voice was shaking. "Our family is destroyed. All because you were too selfish to do the right thing." I took a sip of my coffee. It had gone cold. "The right thing," I repeated. "Tell me, Patricia, in your version of this story, what happens to me after I give Melissa my spot in the trial? You would have found another treatment, another option." "There wasn't one. Not then. The trial was the only thing that worked for our specific cancer profile. Everything else failed." "You don't know that. You didn't try." "I do know that." I met her eyes. Because in another life, I did try. I gave up my spot. I watched Melissa go into remission while I got sicker. I endured chemotherapy that destroyed my body and didn't stop the cancer. I died in a hospice room while Richard and his new girlfriend planned my funeral in the hallway. Patricia blinked. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that you asked me to die for your daughter, and you didn't even realize it. You thought my life was negotiable, that I should be grateful for the opportunity to sacrifice myself for the family." I leaned forward. "But here's what you never understood. I wasn't family to you. I was just the woman who married Richard. I was disposable." "That's not true, isn't it? When's the last time you asked me about my life, Patricia? My job, my dreams, my health. When's the last time you invited me to something that wasn't a family obligation? I paused. You never valued me. So why would I die for you? She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You're a monster. Maybe, I agreed. But I'm a living monster, and Melissa is dead, and nothing you say will change either of those facts. She left without another word. I finished my cold coffee and went home. 3 years later, I was featured in a medical journal. Dr. Morrison had asked if I'd be willing to share my story as part of a study on the trial's long-term success rates. I'd agreed, under the condition that they use a pseudonym. The article was titled, Patient 847, a Case. Study in Early Intervention and Complete Remission. It detailed my diagnosis, my treatment, my recovery. It noted that I'd been cancer-free for over 4 years, with no signs of recurrence. It cited my case as an example of why early detection and access to cutting-edge treatments were crucial. The article didn't mention Melissa. It didn't mention the family that had fractured over my choice. It didn't mention the hate mail I'd received, the friends who'd abandoned me, the whispers that followed me for years. It just told the truth. I'd had cancer. I'd gotten treatment. I'd lived. Sometimes that's all the story needs to be. I was married again by then to a man named David who worked in environmental law and didn't care about country clubs or family dynasties. We'd met at a cancer survivors support group of all places. He'd had lymphoma. He understood. We had a small wedding at a botanical garden. My mother came, sober for the first time in a decade. David's sister was my maid of honor. We didn't invite anyone from my old life. On my wedding day, someone sent me a message on Facebook. It was from Tom, Melissa's widower. I hope you're happy with yourself. My kids grew up without a mother because of you. I hope that brings you joy. I didn't respond, but I didn't delete it either. Because here's the thing about survival. It doesn't come with absolution. I'd chosen my life over Melissa's, and that choice had consequences. People hated me. My first marriage had ended. I'd lost friends, social standing, the version of myself that needed to be liked. But I was alive. And Melissa, who'd had children and a family and every reason to live, she was still dead. The cancer had taken her just like it would have taken me. The only difference was that I'd refused to let it. 5 years after my remission, the treatment became the standard of care. Every patient diagnosed with my type of cancer now had access to it, covered by insurance. No trial, enrollment necessary. The survival rate had climbed to 94%. I read the news articles about it with a strange sense of detachment. All those people who would live now, who would never have to make the choice I'd made, who would never have to decide between their life and someone else's. They were the lucky ones. I thought about Melissa's kids sometimes, Emily and Max. They'd be teenagers now, growing up without their mother, just like Tom's message had said. I wondered if they hated me. I wondered if they even knew who I was, or if I was just a ghost story their father told them, the aunt who'd let their mother die. I wondered if they'd understand someday that I hadn't let Melissa die. I'd just refused to die in her place. There's a difference, even if it doesn't feel like one to them. 10 years after my diagnosis, I got a letter. It arrived at my office. I ran my own marketing consultancy now, small but successful. In a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in cramped teenage script. Dear Sarah, my name is Emily. I'm Melissa's daughter. I'm 16 now. I found out about you from my grandmother. She told me what happened, that you were in a trial, that you could have given your spot to my mom, that you chose not to. She told me you were selfish and cruel, that you killed my mom. But I've been reading about the trial. I looked up the published studies, the medical journals, everything I could find, and I understand now that there was only one spot, only one chance. And if you'd given it to my mom, you would have died instead. I don't know if that makes what you did right. I don't know if I can forgive you for being alive when my mom isn't, but I wanted you to know that I don't think you're a monster. I think you're just a person who wanted to live, and I'm sorry my family made you feel like that was wrong. Emily, I read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and put it in my desk drawer next to the medical journal article and my final remission scan. I didn't respond. What could I say? Thank you for understanding. I'm sorry your mother died. Both felt inadequate. But I kept the letter. 15 years after my diagnosis, I had a daughter of my own. We named her Claire. She had David's dark hair and my stubborn chin. She was healthy, perfect, absolutely terrifying in the way that new life always is. Holding her in the hospital, exhausted and elated, I thought about Melissa's kids, about Emily and Max who'd grown up without their mother, and I thought about the choice I'd made. If I'd given up my spot in the trial, Claire wouldn't exist. This life, my marriage to David, my career, my happiness, none of it would exist. I would have died bitter and alone in that hospice room. Melissa would have lived, she would have watched her kids grow up, would have been there for graduations and weddings and grandchildren. But Claire wouldn't exist. And I couldn't regret that. I couldn't regret my daughter's existence, even knowing what it cost, even knowing who had to die so she could live. 20 years after my diagnosis, Richard reached out. He sent an email to my business account, which I almost deleted without reading. But curiosity won. Sarah, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from. I know I don't deserve a response, but I wanted to apologize. It took me a long time to understand what we asked of you, what my mother and I tried to force you to do. I was so focused on saving Melissa that I didn't see we were condemning you to death. Jessica left me 3 years ago. I'm alone now, and I've had a lot of time to think about the kind of person I am, the kind of husband I was. You deserved better. You deserve to be protected and supported, not guilted into dying for my family. I'm sorry, I know it doesn't change anything, but I needed you to know. Richard. I stared at the email for a long time, then I closed it and went back to work. Some apologies come too late to matter. I'm 53 now. Claire is 18, preparing for college. She wants to study oncology, inspired by my story. David and I just celebrated our 15th anniversary. My mother passed away last year, but we'd reconciled before the end. I'm still cancer-free. Every year on the anniversary of my remission, I get a scan. Every year it comes back clear. Dr. Morrison, who's retired now, sends me a card each time. Another year, Sarah, you're one of our miracles. I don't feel like a miracle. I feel like someone who fought for her life and won, at a cost I'm still paying. Sometimes I dream about Melissa. In the dreams, we're both in the hospital, both dying, and there's only one dose of medicine. I reach for it, and she reaches for it, and our hands meet in the middle. In some versions of the dream, I take it. In others, I give it to her. In all of them, someone dies. I always wake up before I see who. Last week, I got another letter from Emily. She's 32 now, a doctor herself, working in pediatric oncology. She's married. She has a son. Dear Sarah, I wanted you to know that I saved a life yesterday. A little girl, 6 years old, with the same cancer you and my mother had. She came in too late for the standard treatment protocols to be effective. But I remembered your story. I remembered the trial, the cutting-edge research. I found a new experimental treatment still in trials. I got her enrolled. She's responding well. The doctors think she'll make it. I thought you'd want to know that your survival, the choice you made, it taught me something. It taught me that sometimes the only way to save lives is to be ruthless about saving the ones right in front of you. I don't know if my mother would have wanted me to learn that lesson, but I think you already knew it. Thank you for living. Thank you for being selfish enough to choose yourself. The world needed you in it. Emily, I cried when I read it. David found me in my office, tears streaming down my face, clutching the letter. What's wrong? He asked, alarmed. Nothing, I said. Nothing's wrong. I showed him the letter. He read it slowly, then pulled me into his arms. You did the right thing, he said quietly. You always did the right thing. I don't know about that. I do. He pulled back to look at me. Sarah, you're a good person who was put in an impossible situation. You chose to live? That's not selfish. That's human. Maybe he was right. Maybe it didn't matter. I'd made my choice 20 years ago. I'd chosen my life over Melissa's, my future over her children's mother, my chance at happiness over her family's wholeness. And I'd paid for it. In whispers and hate mail and lost relationships, in nightmares and guilt, and the weight of knowing that my joy was built on someone else's grave. But I'd also lived. I'd married David. I'd had Claire. I'd built a career, made new friends, found happiness. I'd survived. And in surviving, I'd somehow, impossibly, made space for Emily to save that little girl. One life, leading to another, leading to another. Maybe that was the point. Maybe there was no right answer, no moral high ground, no way to choose that wouldn't hurt someone. Maybe there was just the choice I made and everything that came after. I'm writing this now because Claire asked me to. She's working on a project for her medical ethics class about resource allocation and impossible choices. She wanted to interview me about my experience. "Mom," she said, sitting across from me at our kitchen table, "if you could go back, knowing everything you know now, would you make the same choice?" I thought about Melissa, about her kids growing up without her, about Patricia's gray hair and Tom's drinking and the family that shattered. I thought about Emily, saving that little girl. I thought about Claire herself, my impossible, precious daughter who wouldn't exist if I'd chosen differently. "Yes," I said, "I would make the same choice, every time. Even though it meant Aunt Melissa died? Even though—" Claire nodded slowly. "Do you think that makes you a bad person?" "I think it makes me a person who wanted to live. And I think the people who asked me to die instead of finding another way, they're the ones who should feel bad. But they thought my life was worth less than Melissa's because I didn't have children yet. Because I was just Richard's wife, not their daughter." I reached across the table and took Claire's hand. But my life wasn't worth less. It was worth exactly as much as hers. And I wasn't wrong for believing that. Claire squeezed my hand. "I'm glad you lived, Mom. I'm glad you fought." "Me too, baby. Me too." That's the story. The one where I was reborn and given a second chance, and I used it to save myself instead of being noble. The one where I let my sister-in-law die so I could live. The one where I chose wrong or right, depending on who you ask. I don't know what the moral is. I don't know if there is one. I just know that I'm alive. And 20 years ago, when they tried to make me give up my spot in the trial, when they told me it was the right thing to do, when they made me feel selfish for wanting to live, I said no. I fought for my place in that trial like my life depended on it. Because it did. And I won. The treatment became FDA approved, just like it did the first time. Thousands of people have been saved by it. The survival rate keeps climbing. Melissa wasn't one of them. But I was. And I'm not sorry. I'm grateful. I'm alive. I'm here. And if that makes me a monster in their eyes, then so be it. I'd rather be a living monster than a dead saint.
I was stood in my kitchen when I was a teen. I put my hand on my hip. My granddad said to me, "Don't stand like that, son." That was the last thing he ever said to me. He was from a different time. Grandparents, we just love them. Yeah, her only hobby left was dental critique. Well, you know what's so funny is that someone else, who was it? Another family member or someone, maybe my sister's partner, when they were there, she said, "You have lovely teeth." His teeth are not straight. So she had a bit of a teeth thing. She was focused on the teeth towards the end. Oh my God, vibes forever. Do you use a softer brush, by the way? I was like, I do try and use a soft brush head because I'm a terrible overbrusher. I wear my gums away, and then I realized that you were talking about paintbrushes. I was like, hard one for small details. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how much detailing I'm doing. Oh. Turns out I'm not gay. Not good perception. Different time, right. I once got called gay for sitting with my legs crossed by a 13-year-old girl. Okay. They're also extremely brutal, so... She's with Ceiling Cat now. She is.